you're like me, maybe a little weird. I use my iPhone a little bit like the evil stepmother for Snow White and her mirror. So as I got in the car today, I said, "Hey Siri, who is the #1 eBirder on the eBird app on the planet Earth?" And I got a readout. First thing is the insulting thing on the readout that says you're number 29,977. I kind of waited to go. Well, I got to the top 10, and there's this guy in 9th place named Hank, and he's like 1679 behind the #1 guy, Hank Kaestner, right? So name sounds familiar. And then there's a guy in second, he's 429 behind the #1 guy, Peter Kaestner. He could probably give a talk on his diplomatic service, which would be fabulous and fascinating. That's not why you're all here. Graduate of Cornell University. Highlight of his birding career in 1989 in Colombia, South America. Russ Ruffing is spelled well. No, I know now. Thank you. He discovered a new antpitta, which I didn't even know existed till I was in Colombia myself earlier this year, named Grallaria kaestneri. Anyway, I'm not going to take any more time because it takes away from birds. We're so pleased that you're here, Peter, and thanks.
Great.
For to share your screen first.
All righty, see here.
All right.
All righty. First of all, I have to apologize. I'm not well. My wife would say that that is my normal state of being. But the last week since I've been back from a month-long trip to Southeast Asia, I felt like I got run over by a train. And this morning, I was trying to decide whether to come to this. And this morning at 3 a.m., I've been sleeping on the couch in the living room. So my wife is not kept up all night by my incessant coughing. And I woke up and I said, God, I feel perfect. I feel just normal. So I got up, started doing all kinds of stuff that I haven't done for the last week. And I just feel awful. So I apologize. You'll probably hear a lot of hacking. We'll try not to infect too many of you. And I do appreciate very much the invitation to be here and to talk to you guys. As Greg said, right now I'm the #1 eBirder, but I don't really count my birds in eBird. I count my birds using something called the IOC list. You can see from here that my IOC number 9910 is quite a bit higher than the eBird number. And there's a administrative process going on right now to try to bring those two lists in harmony. And I talked to the guy, it's an Australian guy that's running it, and he expects that by this time next year that the two lists will be the same. They've got a long way to go. It's over 200 birds different. As you can see, things started fairly early with me. Greg mentioned my brother Hank, and someone else here had given their regards to Hank. Hank is my older brother, 8 years older than me. And Hank started birding when he was 10 years old, when he was visiting my grandparents in Mexico City and saw a vermilion flycatcher. And he went to a store to try to find a book to see if he could identify the flycatcher. And there was a book, indeed, that had a photograph of the flycatcher right on the cover. So he bought the book and he still has it. And that was his spark bird. When he was 10, I was only 2. I don't have any recollection of birding when I was 2, but here I am at about age 4. And I do recall, you can see the ground is covered with mulberries. And I actually remember that my father took a picture of a beautiful orchard oriole eating the mulberries in my grandparents' house in Perry Hall, Maryland. I don't really count that as a spark bird. It certainly is one of the earliest recollections I have. Here I am birding with my brother Hank. The guy in the middle is not a birder, as you may notice. He's looking off in a different direction. I had the wonderful opportunity when I was in ninth grade to go to India for a year and live with not my family, but another family that worked at the US Embassy. I got 155 birds in India in that year, 145 of which were lifers. I went to Cornell University with the intention of becoming an ornithologist. While I was there, I got to study ornithology. They have one ornithology course. I took it as a junior, and then as a senior, I was a teaching assistant. So I helped teach the course. And one of the things that we taught were the bird families. And I decided at that point that I was never going to be idle enough or rich enough to be one of the top world birders, because back then there were people who had seen like 4,000 or 5,000 birds. There's just no way in the world I could ever do that. And this book on the left, a coded list of birds of the world, was the very first one-volume book of all the birds listed in the world. So I decided a couple of things. One is I couldn't compete on the world level. There are 8,600 birds in it. But I made a commitment, a goal to see all of the bird families, because we taught them in the ornithology course. Really enjoyed that part of it. So I started that, and you'll see after a few years I was successful. But one of the things I wanted to put this together to show you a little bit about the evolution of the bird list. You can see I'm obviously a very sophisticated computer graphics guy. But I did manage to put these three images on one slide, which was a milestone for you guys. All of my other talks, I put them in separate slides, and people had to remember what they were. Anyway, the one on the left is the little book I just showed you, the coded book. It has 8,600 birds. What I'm showing you here, the 12 birds in 1974 from the genus Cytholopus. Anybody who know what Cytholopus birds are? Anybody birded in the mountains of South America? Anybody know what a tapaculo is? The Cytholopus are the main genus of the tapaculos. 74, there are 12 species recognized. By 2006, there are 38 species of Cytholopus recognized. By December of 2022, there are 49 species of Cytholopus. They have multiplied. There are 4 Cytholopus tapaculos for everyone that existed when I was in college. So it just gives you an idea. The IOC list right now is 11,001 bird. So that has increased from 8,600 when I was in college. Give you an idea on 28%. IOC? IOC stands for the International Ornithological Committee, which doesn't exist anymore. It's been replaced by the International Ornithological Union, which is the organization that's harmonizing the list. But we still call it the IOC list for some reason. When I was in Cornell, I went to Cornell with the idea of becoming an ornithologist. Oddly enough, the head of the laboratory of ornithology was not really big into ornithology. He didn't recommend it. He said he spent all of his time doing paperwork and teaching students that didn't really care about birds and chasing money to do research. So my dream was kind of shattered. So I went off and became a Peace Corps volunteer, and I ended up in a tiny little village called Nyankunde. I'm not sure. This is my house right here. And this is a school where I was a teacher. And I was a science teacher for 2 years in a tiny little village in the middle of absolutely nowhere. If Joseph Conrad wrote a book called The Heart of Darkness, and the Heart of Darkness was supposed to be a place called Kinshasa, which is the place where the Congo River no longer is navigable. There's some chutes, some waterfalls there. Well, if that is the heart of darkness, this is the armpit of darkness. This is like 3 weeks upriver from the heart of darkness. A very interesting place. Had an absolutely wonderful time. And in the process, I saw over 1,000 lifers. So it worked out very, very well. Here I am with my insect collection. One of the things that I did while I was in Zaire is I had Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology learned that I was going as a volunteer, and they lent me a 20-inch parabolic reflector and about a 10-pound reel-to-reel Niagara recorder. So I schlepped this gigantic recorder and parabola all over Africa, making bird songs. And there's an interesting thing happened. I just got an email, I guess it's about 3 weeks now, from a guy who was leading a bird tour in Uganda. And he said that he was using Merlin to reference the bird song so that he could show the clients on his bird tour what the bird sounded like. And indeed, I did this with my wife in South Africa in January of this year. I wanted to show her what a woodland kingfisher sounded like. I pulled up the woodland kingfisher, and it's my recording from 1977. And this guy sent me an email out of the blue and said, hey, I'm a tour guide. I was just working in Uganda. And all these recordings that came up were from the early 1970s. You must have been recording in Uganda. So, well, right across the border in Eastern Congo. So it's the reason I say that is that when you do make an effort to get recordings or photographs for eBird, those recordings are forever. And if you do a good job, you can have a lasting impact, and you can be contributing to the knowledge of birds and ornithology. This is a terrible picture of a black-crowned waxbill. This was bird number 1,000 for me. My brother Hank is a fabulous speaker. I am not a fabulous speaker. I am a really good bird watcher. I'm a great listener. I am an okay speaker. The reason I'm an okay speaker is I'm too scientific. I'm a biologist by training, and I see myself as a scientist and not an entertainer. My brother is an entertainer, and he moved up to Vermont about 20 years ago, and he had been giving talks at a place called Broadmead, which is a Quaker retirement community north of Baltimore. He said, oh, I've been going to Broadmead 27 years in a row. Can you fill in for me next year? I said, sure. So I go and I give a talk to Broadmead. It's all about the birds of India, beautiful birds, peacocks, pheasants, fantastic. I was very happy with it. At the end, I asked for questions. And one of these little old ladies, she must be 90 years old, raises her hand. She says, and your brother talked every time he almost died. But you didn't almost die. Oh my God. That's my brother just has a way of making stories sound so excited. And if he's riding in Bolivia down a mountain road, for me, I'm riding down the road. For Hank, it's a 4,000-foot drop off, and the tire is wobbling, and he's about ready to go, and the driver's is half drunk, and next thing you know, he said, God, did he make it? Did he make it? I don't know. Anyway, I don't do that. I'm really sorry. But I did learn my lesson. I did learn my lesson from Broadmead. When I was in the Peace Corps, I went to a place at first Christmas break called the Virunga National Park, which is in the Rift Valley in Eastern Congo. And we're staying at a safari lodge. And they had very strict rules. You weren't allowed to leave the safari lodge. Could not leave because it's very dangerous. There are dangerous animals there. So, I'm young and whatever. And I noticed that the people that worked on the safari lodge all left the safari lodge on a trail out the back that went down you see the vegetation down in the valley, it's called riparian or vegetation. There's a river down there. So I said, I can go down there and do some birding. And the local people all went down there to wash their clothes or take a bath or whatever. So these people go down there all the time. Why can't I go down there? So I walk out, instead of going down the path that they use, I go down the main road. I'm walking down the road and there's this Cape buffalo that was grazing. And I figured that I'm just going to mind my own business. And the buffalo is going to mind his own business. I'm just going to walk on past him. And then I'll just go on down. But when I got to the point where I was directly opposite the buffalo looked up, stopped chewing, and started pawing the earth, just like they do in the cartoons before they come and charge. I said, oh God, I'm dead. So I froze. I took a picture real quick so people would know what happened to me. And I froze and watched and they don't have very good eyesight. So as long as you don't move, they can't really see you. So I froze, and after a few minutes, he put his head back down and started feeding. So then I moved away. Instead of moving back sideways, I just moved straight back from him, because this way I wouldn't move vis-a-vis the background. And I went straight back up to the lodge. I didn't leave after that.
Almost died.
One of the things that was amazing about the place where I was a volunteer is that it was very close to the Ruwenzori Mountains, which are the border between Uganda and Congo. And here I am at about 14,000 feet. Now, you guys have a new and improved version of this talk, so you don't have to think quite so much. When I was younger, and this was a photograph when I was younger, I used to have a lot of interest in girls, and I tended to have more luck developing relationships with the mothers of the women and the girls that I was interested in than the girls themselves. And one of the things that I used to hear sometimes from the mothers is that they thought that I looked a bit like this guy. That will come back to haunt me. Anyway, at the end of my stay in the Congo, I had the pleasure of being a guide for a bird bonanza tour. And the mountain in the background is Mount Kahuzi. The guy on the right of me, on my left, is the first guy is Arnold Small, who used to be the president of the ABA. The next guy, the white hair, is Norm Chesterfield, who was #1 world birder at that time. He had about 5,000 birds. The next guy is Joel Abramson, and then Martin Edwards. Joel Abramson was the owner of the bird tour company. All right, so leave the farm, the Peace Corps, no more science teacher. And while I was on my way home from Africa, I took the Foreign Service exam and started a career in 1980 as a vice consul in the U.S. State Department. This is my first work environment. This is the West Wing of the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, India. And I spent a lot of time issuing visas and interviewing people. One of the nice things about India is that there are a lot of birds in India. This is an Indian darter. And I love this photograph. It's not great quality, but it's amazing to see the sequential molt of all the flight feathers of the bird. You can also see at the base of the tail, the uropygial gland. And interestingly here, you can see the primary feathers, secondary feathers, and tertiary feathers, but the scapulars, which are not flight feathers, have not come out. Sort of interesting. One of my absolute favorite birds in the world is something called the jungle babbler. And this bird was photographed in the heat of one of the hottest days, it's about 110 degrees in my garden. And a whole bunch of babblers are just lying around in the sun, looking crazed. And they're just absolutely wild. And it's a really fun. I just got, it's crazy how these things happen. Just in the last couple of days, I got an email from somebody that had done a study of jungle babblers. And he knew that I like jungle babblers, so he sent me this printout of his study. And they were really are marvelous, marvelous creatures. They go around in groups. They just constantly make noise. They constantly fuss at each other. They're just absolutely wonderful creatures. One of the things, again, I started the Foreign Service 1980s. This is 1981 when I was in New Delhi. This is a sight that you will not see in India. Back then, there were several species of vultures that were quite common. You can see that the vultures are eating a carcass of a cow. And in the 1990s, a veterinary analgesic called diclofenac was introduced into India. And what happened is that as the cows got old and decrepit, the Hindus that revered the cows would give them these drugs to make them feel better so they wouldn't suffer. Problem is, diclofenac is deadly to vultures. And as a result of the use of diclofenac in India, all of the vultures in India are critically endangered. Some of them are starting to come back. They've banned diclofenac, and they're now having some special feeding stations where they're trying to bring them back. But there used to be millions and millions of vultures, and there are now hundreds of vultures. I'd mentioned my brother Hank, who started me on this wonderful voyage of birding. He came to India, and he's visited me everywhere where I was a Foreign Service officer, except for Afghanistan. Never came to Afghanistan. One of the interesting things about this photograph is the gentleman who is guiding us. This is in a place called Bharatpur, which you'll learn about in October. The very famous birding park in northern India. And the guide is named Bholu Khan. And in 2020, just before the COVID, I was leading a bird tour for rock jumper birding adventures in northern India. And my local guide that assisted me was Bholu Khan's son, Ansar. So you'll see Ansar's picture later. I mentioned earlier that I was trying to find families. Does anybody have any idea what families of birds I would be looking for in India? Kind of what families would be in the Oriental region. I'm sorry, pheasants? Yes, that would be one. Yeah. Although back then the pheasants and bobwhites were considered the same, but now they're separate. But yeah, pheasants are one. Pittas are one. And the most interesting one is something called an Ibidorhynchus Struther's eye, which is a single species of bird in the family Ibidorhynchidae, which are the ibisbill. And the ibisbill is a wonderful bird. I'll show you a picture later. And back in the early 1980s, almost nothing was known about it. This book, The Breeding Birds of Kashmir, actually had information about a spot in northern India where they bred. So I got this book. The book was published in 1952 or 3. So the research that was done in like the 30s and 40s. And there's a photograph in the book of the breeding grounds of the ibisbill, with an ibisbill on the rocks. They breed in funny rocks. They have a curved bill, ibisbill, and the rocks are just the diameter of their bill, so they can feed on the bottoms of the rocks. Very interesting. You don't have to turn them over. So I got this book, and on the weekend of Labor Day of 1981, I decided to go to the Wardwan Valley to try to find this this rare and unusual bird. To get there, you have to walk 25 miles. You first climb up over a 13,000 foot pass. You start at about 5,000 feet. So you have to climb up 8,000 feet and then walk down a very gentle slope all the way down to the final place. So I walked up and down in one day, and I arrived at the spot. And when I arrived, I was on a little knoll, and I all of a sudden understood, I realized looking out that this was the spot where the photograph had been taken that was in the book. It was the exact same perspective. And I looked down in the evening gloom, and there was a freaking ibis bell sitting right there. I get a better picture later. One of the fun things I was able to do while I was in doing consular work at the U.S. Embassy, the ambassador one day came and told me, he said that the head of the Smithsonian is coming to visit, and would you take off a day of work and show him around? So the tall guy here is Dylan Ripley, who is the secretary of the Smithsonian. The short guy is sort of Roger Troy Peterson and John James Audubon, all wrapped up in one of India, a guy named Salim Ali, who is sort of the #1 ornithologist and birder. Just really, really neat guy. And I had a wonderful, wonderful day taking them out birding. I want to talk to you a little bit about how I did my birding back then. One of the great things was this book, Finding Birds Around the World. And it has information on, I don't know, 150 or 175 different places around the world. And some of it is really quite detailed. It has detailed maps, has lists of the birds that are likely to be seen there. This is very, very, very useful to me in my quest to find not only the families, but to find birds around the world. Now, this is a picture. This is a 1986 selfie that I took in the Iguazu Falls National Park in Argentina. As at this time, I showed you the picture of Joel Abramson, who was the head of the Bird Bonanza Tour Company. Joel Abramson had been corresponding with the Guinness Book of Records, and he was trying to get into the Guinness Book of Records as being the first person to see all the bird families. And I learned in the summer of 1986, Joel was going to make his third trip to Madagascar to see a ground roller. So, and he was going in October. I said, boy, I had 4 families, not 3, 4 families to get. So I went off and found the 4 families. So this is the last family that I got on the 1st of October, 1986 in Argentina, where I saw the rufous gnat eater, Conophaga rufa, and became the first person to see all the bird families. At that time, can anybody guess how many bird families there were? Yes. 27. A good guess. 159. Anybody know how many families there are now? I should have started with this question.
231.
250.
250.
So it's gone from 159 to 250 in the same time. And I've kept my streak alive, so I've seen every family still. And I was able to get into to the Guinness Book of Records. One of the things they asked for a picture, and I figured if I got a picture that had birds in it, that they might publish it in the book, because the vast majority of records in the books don't have pictures. So you can see that my father, Benjamin Kaestner, got the credit for the photograph, but the real credit goes to my wife, Kimberly, who at the time this photograph was taken by my father was on all fours on the ground behind me with a loaf of bread, throwing the bread up so that the seagulls could come and hover over the top of my head. And that's what got me into the Guinness Book of Records. So this is one of the major things that happened in my life. This was I met Kimberly in December 20th, 1986. This is skiing in Lake Tahoe in early 1987. We got married in the summer of 87, about 6 months after we met. And a year later, we went off to Bogota, Colombia. And this is a photograph of me and our cat in Bogota, Colombia. Now, my wife is an uncommonly supportive individual and has only told me once in my life I couldn't go bird watching. And that was on our wedding day. I still don't understand it, but you know, sometimes you go with the flow, you know. So yeah, my brother Hank, my wedding was in Michigan. And anybody know a special bird that lives in Michigan? Curlin's warbler. Okay, I hadn't seen a Curlin's warbler. Well, it turns out that my wife had seen the Curlin's warbler. Here she is in Mayo, Michigan, on her bachelorette party. So she goes up to Mayo and gets a Curlin's warbler. And then when I want to add it to my list, my brother says, look, we can leave at 4 in. We'll drive up there. We'll get the bird. We'll be back by lunch. It'll be no problem at all. So anyway, Kimberly put her foot down, not too surprisingly. But the result of that is that Kimberly had seen the Curlin's warbler, had not seen the Curlin's warbler. So when we moved to Bogota, we decided that we were going to get a pet as sort of a way of seeing whether we could have another living being in our household, a prelude to having children. Did it work? Anyway, when it came time to name our cat, guess what we called it? Kirtland. So it was a constant reminder. Kimberly had seen the Kirtland's warbler. I had not seen the Kirtland's warbler. One of the things that happened in Bogota one day in October of 1989, I was coming back from a work trip to Villavicencio and stopped along this road and heard a bird that was unknown to me. And at 45 minutes of playback, I was able to lure it out into the open and see it. And it turned out to be this bird, which is now called the Cundinamarca antpitta, and was named for me. Gary Stiles is Grallaria kaestneri. And I have a much better picture of it. But this is the first bird that we've, and the first bird that was became the type specimen. Excuse me. I must say, when we collected that specimen, my wife was home. We had a newborn child. Let's see, Katie was at the time 2 months old. And I got this dead bird. You guys know what happens when birds die? Is most birds have parasites of various kinds. And when the birds die, the parasites go off and look for some other place to live because the host is dead, so it's not very good. So anyway, so I got this dead bird. Kimberly is at home. I'm so excited to show her this new species. And she's breastfeeding my eldest daughter, who's a couple months old. And I plopped this dead bird on the pillow next to Katie. She was not amused. Anyway, 2 children later, In Malaysia, my brother visiting again. This is 1996 to 99. I was living in Namibia, wonderful place for birds. I got to meet the King of Pop while we were there. One of the perks of being a diplomat. Also saw some great birds in Southwest Africa. From there, we moved to Guatemala, and this volcano Pacaya was visible from our house. We went climbing on it. This is a picture of our aide director standing up on the top of the mountain. And while I was in Guatemala, I had an opportunity to go to Ethiopia for 6 weeks to fill in the consular section there. This is the golf course in Djibouti, which I visited for a weekend there. And then on my way back from Addis Ababa on September 11th, 2001, my plane was flying over the Atlantic. And instead of continuing to the left towards Atlanta, where we were headed from Frankfurt, we started turning to the right. It's not right. We ended up landing at Gander, Newfoundland. And that day, some 30 gigantic planes just dropped out of the sky. After 27 hours of sitting on the plane while the Canadian people figured out what to do with us, thousands and thousands of people, we were bused to a town of Lewisport, where we were put up a church. And the ladies from the community came in and fed us 3 square meals a day. And the reception that we got was absolutely extraordinary. When we got back on the plane, this woman, Shirley Jones, passed the hat to take up a collection for the community. I have difficulty talking about this because I get choked up emotionally, but that fund has $2.5 million, and we have given 300 or 400 kids in that area advanced education in trades, in university. We've got trained doctors, the whole bit. It's a fantastic story. And indeed, there was a musical about this in which our fundraising is mentioned briefly. With the musical, if you ever get a chance to see it, either in person, for a while, I think it was on Apple Plus, so on one of the streaming services had it. It's a really, really amazing musical. It's a very, very well done, extraordinary story. Let's see, this is the next year, an opportunity to travel to Antarctica from South Africa. You don't want to go to Antarctica from South Africa. It takes 7 days to get there. And when you get there, there's nothing to see because there's no land. You just see this, you just see ice. But it's a great way to see some good birds. And this bird is a very, very distant emperor penguin. And learned an interesting thing about emperor penguins, and that is that they float much higher in the water than king penguins do. King penguins, just basically the head comes out of the water. But when emperor penguins in the water, they have so much blubber and so much insulation because they live so much farther south that they're much more buoyant. You can tell them from a tremendous distance. On the 7-day trip back, I was convinced, for no good reason, that we were going to see Atlantic petrels, because I wanted to see when it would be a lifer for me. There weren't that many lifers on the trip. So every day I would be on Atlantic petrel watch, and everybody else, there were 115 people on the boat. They're all sort of the top pelagic birders from around the world. People come from everywhere. I'd flown in from Brazil, People come from everywhere, Australia, New Zealand, Europe. And they got a big kick out of this. And one of the guys was actually a very good illustrator. So he makes this life-size Atlantic petrel and it goes down the poop deck and sticks it up. So anyway, yeah, it was a big chuck. But in the end, we saw 18 Atlantic petrels. So I got the last laugh. Okay, from there, we went to Egypt, our family in the Kana Khalili. This is a scrub wardrobe. I'm going to need to go a little faster. The reason I have this picture actually is in a couple of books because, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only photograph of this bird ever taken. It's a DuPont's lark. There's a very rare, very local race of it in northern Africa. DuPont's lark. If anybody here has seen DuPont's lark, you're going to see it in Spain. It's pretty common. But there's a very rare North African version. And even though this is a crummy picture, it's one. This is the Sinai, had a lot of good birding in the Sinai. This is a bird called a corncrake, which is an endangered species in Europe. Very, very hard to see. They live in thick grass, except for on migration in the Sinai where they walk around in the grass. While I was in Cairo, I went to Syria for several reasons. And this is the ruins of Aleppo, which were destroyed by ISIS a few years ago. And I flew to Damascus on a Friday evening, hired a car, and drove up to Aleppo, arriving there at midnight, and went birding for 2 days, and got this bird, the CC partridge. This is my bird number 8,000. Back in New Delhi, 2006 to 2009, I had a wonderful job. I was the minister counselor for consular affairs. So I started there in the 1980s as a visa, called visa wala, visa guy. So I'm doing visa interviews, hundreds of them a day. So here I'm in charge of all U.S. government visa operations for the whole country, with a staff of about 300 people. And when I first got there, we had a large press conference. And anyway, it was a lot of fun and very, very interesting time. This is a picture taken by my brother Reed at the Pushkar Camel Fair in India. While I was there, I traced some rare birds like this forest owlet that was just only rediscovered 2 years before I got back in 2004. When I was there in the 1980s, it had not been seen for 100 years. And this delightful photograph is the first photograph ever of this bird in the wild, called the Western tragopy. Unfortunately, my camera kind of misfired at the time. But the next day, I was with Kimberly, and we taped in a tragopy, and the bird came and landed. I guess it's sort of about the distance to the top of the screen there. It just sat there for about 3 seconds looking down at us. Really amazing, amazing bird. One of my responsibilities in New Delhi was the Kingdom of Bhutan. So here I am meeting with the members of the Bhutanese government's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they knew I was a birder, so they put me together with a local birder and sent me out, and got a couple of lifers, including this wonderful white-bellied heron, which is very, very rare endangered species. While I was in New Delhi, I went up to the north with my 2 daughters. Here we are at a pass that's 17,600 feet high. And this is just, to get into another area. We ended up camping at about 14,000 feet. And I went off to find the birds I was looking for, and I told the children not to exert themselves. And of course, the daughter on the left, with her mouth open, doesn't know the meaning of don't exert yourself. So she went climbing mountains and got altitude sickness really bad, 14,000 feet. It's not funny. Meanwhile, I got the black-necked crane, that Tibetan sand grouse. And the next morning, both of my daughters hadn't slept all night. And as soon as the sun came up, we grabbed our driver and immediately got down. The problem in that part of, we were in a place called Ladakh, which is part of the Tibetan Plateau. The problem there is that the lowest we could get was 9,000 feet. So I was really kind of hopeful that that would be low enough. And it turned out it was okay. And both of my daughters survived to tell the tale. And if they hadn't, they would have been in big trouble. Kimberly was her mother's house, I think, was not with us. This is another birding opportunity with my brother Hank on the right. The guy on the left is John Hornbuckle, who at the time was one of the top 2 or 3 birders in the world. And we were in a place called Assam, which is a really good place to see the greater Ajahn. I always kind of think of these 2 pictures. We were talking about perks of the Foreign Service. We had a small problem with the Dalai Lama. He would send Buddhist monks to the United States, and some of them were not behaving themselves. And if you get a letter from the Dalai Lama that says, please give this guy a visa, I mean, you're not going to say, well, we're not sure. Of course, you're going to give him a visa. So anyway, when these guys started misbehaving, I got a message to His Holiness and said, hey, you have to be more careful because we're going to, we want to give these guys visas, but if they're not behaving themselves, then we can't give them visas. So anyway, so I waited until my daughter on the left back from college, and we ended up 45 minutes alone with the Dalai Lama, his hotel suite in New Delhi. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was funny. I can't tell you any quotes or anything particular that he said, but it's just everything he said, that his whole presence just made us tingle all over. It was really one of the most amazing experiences of my life.
Interesting.
All right, so I left India and was working in Washington. And while I was in Washington, I got an assignment to go off to Afghanistan. And while I was working, I went out for a week's training in Indiana. And this training will come up later in years. I need to sort of bookmark this spot because something happened at this training that we need to remember. So this is the Blue Mosque in Mazar-e Sharif. Spent a full year on the ground in northern Afghanistan. This is my security detail. Sadly, I was not able to do any birding except on the military base where I live. But I did get 150 birds there, including the Afghan snowfinch. Almost all the pictures I took at that time were birds sitting on concertina wire. First was a Spanish sparrow. This is the rosy pastor or rosy starling. Okay, after Afghanistan, I sort of did a retirement gig in Frankfurt, Germany. And at this point, Kimberly, who had been also working in the State Department with me, had retired. So for my last 2 years, Kimberly was able to enjoy Europe and go bike riding and have fun. And I met a guy who happened to be the managing director of this Frankfurter Rundschau newspaper. He was also a bird watcher. So he decided to do a little piece on me in German. So 2016, I'm retired. As my golden handshake from the State Department. That's about all they give you. And my first thing I wanted to do was to take Kimberly down under, because I had lived in Papua New Guinea. I'd been to Australia many times, and I wanted to show Kimberly Australia and New Zealand. Australia is one of the really fabulous places for birds in the world. This is the very dangerous southern cassowary. The middle nail on the foot of the cassowary is so deadly that it can kill people. In fact, there was somebody killed just a couple of years ago from a pet cassowary they had in Australia. We also went to Papua New Guinea. And the reason for that was that this bird, the wattled plowbill, had just been elevated to species, the family. So there are 159 families now, there are 250. So this is when I was living in Papua New Guinea in the early 1980s. This was not considered a family. I didn't see it, but it later became a family. So I had to go back and keep my family record clean. It was interesting because one of the things that happens to those of you who are getting up in years is you lose your high frequency hearing. And this bird was calling, and Kimberly could hear it call. My guide could hear it call, but I couldn't hear it call. So I played the tape. I could hear the tape because it was close by. And brought it in and got a crummy picture. I take a lot of crummy pictures, as you may have noticed. One of the highlights of this trip down under was a cruise to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand. Ever have a chance to do it? It's really, really memorable. One of the highlights for the yellow-eyed penguins. This is a subantarctic snipe. We were very fortunate because on our boat was Peter Harrison, who is one of the great seabird book authors. Here he is talking about the skull of a royal albatross. Here's some Salvin's albatrosses fighting for food off of our boat. This is a photograph by Lau Gwyn, who was one of the guides on the ship, who lent me this photograph. It just gives you an idea what the seas were like. In the 25 years they've been running this trip, it was the first time that they were unable to land on Macquarie Island because the weather was so terrible. We had somebody who was medevaced with a broken hip. We had a couple of other people that left the ship on crutches. My wife broke a rib. It was really pretty amazing, the weather down there. But it's worth every minute. It's really good. Another bucket list destination for me were the Galapagos. This is a marine iguana. This is a Galapagos finch. This is a cactus finch. A great frigate bird. This is a red-footed booby. I want to show you. The vast majority of my pictures are, to put it mildly, lousy. But this one actually is not too bad. I'm going to blow it up, see if I can blow it up. You can actually identify the photograph, the people that are reflected in the eyeball of the booby. So that one turned out okay. Another one of my bucket list destinations was Madagascar. I had been there 3 times, and the last time I went, Kimberly was supposed to come with me, and our youngest daughter got malaria, and Kimberly felt it was more important to stay with her daughter who almost died, and to go birding in Madagascar with me. So anyway, so I owed her a trip to Madagascar. This is so perfect for Kimberly. This 25-pound mammal leapt from behind her without her knowing it and landed right on top of her head. And her reaction is total delight. So any woman that has that reaction to a surprise of a 20-pound animal landing on their head is okay in my book. This is one of the birds I was looking for. This is a helmet vanga, one of the special birds, Madagascar. About the same time, I'd been requested by the U.S. Embassy in Bogota to help the Colombian government promote bird tourism. In 2017, the Colombian government had a landmark peace treaty with FARC guerrilla group. So in 2018, went down to talk to them. And the idea was to bring bird watchers into the remote areas where the FARC were strong as a way of getting some immediate economic advantages, economic benefits. And it actually has worked very, very well. And the sort of the culmination of my efforts is we did a Grallaria diplomatica, right? Went around with a bunch of media people, newspapers, television, gave interviews, and went around northern Colombia and got interested in it. Partially as a result of that, the next year, 2019, the ABA had I think it was a 50th anniversary celebration in Bogota, and they had a Bogota, Colombia safari. I think we had 75 or 80 clients that came down. They did a week in Bogota and a week in Cali, and then they divided up into small groups and went out and birded in those two areas. So it worked out very, very well. This is one of my favorite birds, and I always have it in my presentation because it's Kimberly's favorite bird. This is the white-booted racketail. It's a type of hummingbird. One of the fun things about this bird is because he's got white boots, he's got white feet. Most hummingbirds have black feet, but black feet would really look awful. It just wouldn't work. We're talking about lousy photographs. This bird is a Puerto Rican parrot, and the reason it's here is because it's number 9,000. The last several years, 9,000 was in, gosh, 7 years ago now. Since then, I've been catching up birds in the Andes. This is a velvet purple coronet. The previous one was a Yokotoko antpitta, the glistening green tanager. I always try to bird with my brother. I just was with him this year, and I'm planning another trip in October with him. I love this photograph of him howling at San Isidro Lodge in eastern Ecuador. This is a grass green tanager. The other was glistening green tanager. One thing that happened in the summer of 2019 is I became a part-time tour guide for Rock Jumper International Birding Adventures. And here I am with some of the Rock Jumper staff, including their founder over on the left, Adam Riley, the bald guy, and some of their senior guides. This was taken at birding safari in Colombia. I went straight from Colombia to Indonesia. I was gone for about 10 weeks, which Kimberly and I decided was not a recipe for success. Don't stay away as long anymore. This is a sea owl tarsier, one of the rarest mammals in the world. Only found on one tiny little island in northeastern part of Indonesia. While I was in sea owl, I did some scuba diving. And the island of Sea Owl is an active volcano, as there many of the islands are in Indonesia. It's a tiny island. So basically it's just an active volcano, there's nothing else. And while I was diving, you could hear the volcano rumbling. I thought it was fantastic. So I get up, and the dive master, this is not a really popular dive location. The guy says he gets one client a month on average. This is the last client. He had two divers from Germany. They heard the volcano rumbling underground, immediately came up to the surface, immediately got back to land, immediately got the next boat off the island. They were afraid it was going to be their last dive. This is one of the birds, one of the kingfishers of Sulawesi, greenback kingfisher. So early 2020, this was I think this is my very first birding gig with Rock Jumper in a small group of birders in southern India. To the greater Racketail Drongo. We also went to Sri Lanka. I did 3 tours back to back to back. The Sri Lankan's jungle fowl, yellow-browed bulbul. And I actually got a lifer on the trip. This is the Sri Lanka bay owl. And this is our 3rd trip. This is in northern India. We had a tiger and birds trip. Northern India, really fascinating because you're going to get pictures of India next week. So I won't dwell too much. This is the red nape ibis. The guy on the right is Ansar Khan. This is Bolu Khan's son, who is now one of the very top birding guides in northern India. Really nice guy. The guy in the middle is Jayoti, who is a guide at Ranthambore, which is a tiger reserve. This is one of the birds that we were looking for in northern India. This is the ibisbill. Now, for me, I had to hike 25 miles up over 13,000 pass to get to it. We've now learned that they spend the winter at the base of the Himalayas in northern India. So anybody can see them. In fact, you see them right from the main road.
But you've got a better story.
I did. I got a much better story. Anyway, we saw 11 tigers on our tiger and bird trip. It's very successful. We also saw a sloth bear and my old buddy, jungle babbler. Now, during the lockdown, Kimberly and I made several trips. This is a trip to Kenya we did in December of 2020. This is a golden weaver, secretary bird. This is bird number 9,500, the Usambara thrush. And then I also did another trip with my brother. We do a lot of celebration at ice cream. And has anybody seen an article in Outside magazine? Any chance? No. Okay, in Outside magazine, I was in Peru doing a cleanup on some antpittas that had been split. This is the Sina antpitta. At the time I saw this and took this picture, I was only the 2nd person to photograph this bird in a while. I also got the Rufous naped antpitta. This is a variety in Ecuador that has red eyes. The other ones have gray eyes. It also has a slightly different call. And also able to bump into my old friend. This is my antpitta, Kundinamark antpitta. And this is a bird that is now being fed in a place in eastern Colombia. So anybody can now see it. For many, many years, it was almost impossible to see. My brother spent a full day in 2019 when I was meeting with the government of Colombia people. He went to try to see it and never saw it. Heard it. Let's see, this is last year, birding in northeastern India, home of the Indian rhino. This wonderful bird, the slender-billed scimitar babbler. And while I was up there, I was eating some trail mix. And I'm kind of OCD always, I'm a bit weird about some things. When I eat trail mix, I'll eat all the nuts first, then all the M&Ms first, and then all the raisins. Anybody else do that? Okay, of course. How else do you eat it, right? Okay, so I'd eaten the nuts, I'd eaten the M&Ms, and eaten the raisins. And one of the raisins was kind of stuck underneath of my my wedding ring. It's a couple of times trying to get it into my mouth. It wouldn't come off. Anyway, that was not a raisin. That thing that is attached to my finger is a leech. And it attached itself underneath of the ring. And that's the reason that I couldn't eat it. I kept biting it and trying to pull it off. Just couldn't get it. Anyway, so if you're ever in the mountains of the eastern Himalayas, be really careful. I've been taking pictures of some native jack in the pulp. They had like 5 or 6 species of jack in the pulp, and one of the Japanese pulpits had a leech on it, and it got on. I didn't notice it, so I started eating, and next thing I know, trying to eat the leech. One of the things that Kimberly and I do together is scuba dive. We had an opportunity last year to do a trip to Aldabra Atoll, which is a great diving location, and also has a couple of very rare endemic birds. And interesting, it has a rare endemic fish. This is the Mauritius blue angelfish, which is only recognized as existing in the Seychelles about 10 years ago. And we actually saw quite a few of them. Very beautiful. This is the Aldabra flightless rail. This is the Malagasy sacred ibis, which is split as a separate species from the African bird. This is the Aldabra drongo. This bird was called Abbott's sunbird, found in Aldabra, and it has the distinction of being the shortest term lifer I've ever had. I got this in June, and in August it was lumped with a Siamongous sunbird. So it was only on my list for about 2.5 months, and then I lost it. Alrighty, last summer we also Kimberly and I went. Kimberly loves boat trips, and this book, I don't know whether any of you all noticed the picture of us on Enderby Island on the New Zealand sub-Antarctic cruise is a sister ship to this one. And it's just by pure coincidence, because we were signed up for another trip. I signed up on the cheapest trip I could get to go to Svalbard. And the ship that we were on did something naughty, and they pulled its license to have passengers or something. So the travel agent found us rooms on this boat by coincidence. And it turned out that not only were we on the sister ship, but we were in the same stateroom as we had been 14 years earlier.
Home sweet home.
Not a lot of birds in Svalbard, which is why I was going to do it the cheapest way possible. This is a kittiwake. We were very fortunate the way that we did do it, because the trip we did was really remarkable, and it was very special being on a boat. It only has 45 passengers, so it's a very intimate experience. Let's see. This is within the last year. This is last October. Was birding up in northwestern Argentina. This is Orog Synclodes. There's something about this picture. I love it. Sort of like, 2 guys out for a stroll. There are a couple of buds, This is a South American painted snipe, which is one of my main targets for the Argentine trip. This is an elegant crested tinamou. And in Argentina, I spent 2 weeks birding in the Northwest. And then I did 3 tours for rock jumper. I did one in Patagonia. This is number 1. And on this tour, Kimberly came along as a client, which is a lot of fun. This is at the Moreno Glacier. And had a lot of fun, saw some good birds. This is the brown Synclodes. This is a white-bellied seed snipe, last seed snipe, Chilean hawk. And the 3 trips for rock jumper was a land-based Patagonia, and then a sea-based trip to the Falkland Islands and to Antarctica, and then another Patagonian trip. So this is a bird that we saw in in Falkland Islands. This is a kelp goose. And this is not photoshopped at all. This is just what the bird looked like standing on the beach. We were in this colony of cormorants and penguins. And Kimberly says, "Did you get a good picture of these shags? They really are interesting looking." I said, "No, I don't think I've got a really good picture." So I went down and got a picture sort of looking up against the sky. And then I underexposed it because of the exposure was bright. And it turned out to be just perfect. Always, when your wife suggests a picture, always take it.
Yes, dear.
White bridal finch. This is a yellow-billed pintail from South Georgia pipit. We only got 5 minutes, so we're going to go a little quick. So lots of Atlantic petrels on this trip. And we also saw a lot of emperor penguins. We saw 20-some emperor penguins. This handsome bird is an Antarctic petrel. And then after the Antarctic part, we did a trip specifically to find this bird, the hooded grebe, which we were successful. And then this year, March, this is birdie in Vietnam, home with some very nice looking pittas. And laughing thrushes, a collared laughing thrush, and tailed laughing thrush. This is a short-tailed parrotbill, pale-billed wren babbler. To see this bird, I had to hike 11 kilometers up a mountain and camp up on the top of the mountain. And does anybody know the television show Naked and Afraid? This is my Naked and Afraid bird. One of the things for some reason, I like watching this stupid show. There's a really important life lesson in Naked and Afraid. And the important life lesson is, it doesn't matter how talented you are, how good you are making fire or building shelters. The people that survive and do well in Naked and Afraid are the people that have mental toughness. And when we were climbing up and my legs were just burning, 70 years old, and hiking for all day long from 3 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, just constantly going, just in agony. And it's all about your mental strength. And you just, okay, we're going to do it. And it really doesn't matter. And it was interesting because when I came back down, the same thing, I had downhill the whole day. And it took over a week for my legs to finally feel normal, just because I'd been pushing and pushing and pushing so hard. This is this year in the Philippines. Kimberly loves marine mammals, so we went to the Philippines to see a dugong, a relative of the manatee. And again, the diving is something that Kimberly likes. Kimberly is not a birder per se. She loves animals. She's a Maryland master naturalist, and but she's not a birder per se. And this is one thing that we really enjoy doing together, the scuba diving. This is a Philippine tarsier that I saw after I left Kimberly. And there's some birds. This is the tabla strongo. This is from May with my brother Hank, birding in Colombia. I love the excitement of this picture. We just had a really memorable encounter with a yellow-eared parrot. This is a thicket tinamou. I had been told by our guide that it was impossible to get a picture of a thicket tinamou. And somebody tells me it's impossible, and thicket antpitta, not thicket antpitta. When somebody tells me it's impossible to get a picture of an antpitta, I'm going to get a picture of an antpitta. This is my most recent trip. This is the Sumatran woodpecker. I also saw Schneider's pitta on Mount Kerinci in Sumatra. This is my bird number 9,901. And the reason that I celebrated this is because there are 11,001 birds in the IOC. This bird represents having surpassed 90% of all the birds in the world. And there's my celebration. Usually I celebrate round numbers, but this was an exception. And just 10 days ago, we were camping in the Marathas Mountains of southern Borneo. This is the Marathas white-eye, Marathas blue flycatcher, both of which were just described very recently. Okay, we've got 1 minute left to go. Okay, I mentioned this thing about the mothers of my girlfriends and all that back in the day. Well, when I was at this training in December 2012 and in Indiana, the training was very realistic, and we had lots of Afghan refugees who live in the US that were playing role models. So we would go in, we'd have a meeting, and there would be real Afghans there, and we would try to have a meeting, and it would be very, very realistic. At the end of this 1 week, we had a wonderful dinner. And because I had spent so much time in India, I speak Hindi. And Hindi is very similar to Dari, which is one of the major languages of Afghanistan. So I was able to communicate with these guys in their own language, which they appreciated very much. And as a way of sort of reciprocating, one of the guys told me that I was very handsome and that I looked just like Hafez al-Assad, who is the murderous, genocidal dictator, who is the father of Bashir al-Assad, who is the murderous, genocidal dictator of Syria now. So I've gone from Robert Redford to Hafez al-Assad. This is what birding can do for you. Thank you all very much.
We have time for a few questions, and if somebody's under Zoom, they might want to type it in the chat. But Eileen. Where are you going next is the question.
Okay, much to my wife's chagrin, much to Kimberly's chagrin, I'm leaving in about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, for a month in Brazil. I'm going to spend about 2 weeks in eastern Brazil doing some cleanup. I'm hiring a car and driving around. And then I'm spending 2 weeks with my brother and a local guide in the Amazon. And I'm hoping as a result of that month to see an extra 30 species of birds. Thank you.
Somebody types up, don't you? Yeah.
Anybody else?
Show up there.
Don't be bashful.
Yeah, no, I have an entirely non-serious question.
That's
You
okay.
were told not to go birding on your wedding day. And
Yes.
you didn't. How many birds did you see on your wedding day? Because you're a birder, you are always birding.
That's a very good question. I do bird all the time.
Yeah.
I bird. If the window's open at night, I'll be listening for thrushes. I'll be listening for owls. Driving down the road, I'm constantly looking for things, identifying things. Nowadays with eBird, I do at least one eBird list every single day.
Mhm.
And I've been doing that for some 2,500 consecutive days. Like, how many years that is? It's a lot of years. Back then, I didn't keep records of all the birds I saw. So though I'm sure that I saw something, whether it was crows or Canada geese, very common in southeastern Michigan in the summer. I don't have any record of it.
Russ Ruffing sent in this question.
What is your favorite country for birding? And are there any countries on your must-do list?
My favorite place for birding is Colombia, without a doubt. And the reason for that is they have more birds than any. Also, because I have a bird there It's my bird. Nice. Now, oh, there you go. You can see from this that there are not a lot of places where I have not been. And the places where I haven't been pretty much don't have a lot of birds. There are a few places in Southeast Asia. Burma is one, Laos, Cambodia. But one of the things I really want to go to is Mongolia. You can see there's a big gray blob in the map there. I want to fill that in. And fortunately, Rock Jumper has scheduled me for a couple of tours in 2025. One of them is to Mongolia. Going to be not so much a bird tour as a snow leopard tour. That's our main goal. We're going to be mammals, and we're going to spend about 5 days looking for snow leopards in the Altai mountains of Western Mongolia. So right now, I'd love to get to Libya. I'd love to clean up some of those gray blobs in Africa. So in terms of sort of my must-go-to places, right now the countries are more driven by eBird map voids than anything. In terms of getting to 10,000, I have a goal of getting to 10,000. I need 190 birds. Most of those birds are in the Philippines, China, Brazil, and Indonesia. Indonesia is number one. I just spent a month in Indonesia and got 30 birds. And I'm hoping to go back to Indonesia next year and hope to get another 25 or so birds. So my favorite country is Colombia. Indonesia is the place where I can see the most birds right now. Yes, sir.
You have a welcome sponsor that helps you to pick up
Do I have a wealthy sponsor? No. And what I'm doing right now is not sustainable. I'm making a crush to get to 10,000, and I'm drawing down my retirement savings. I was a government servant. You don't make a lot of money when you're a government servant, but you do get regular money. They pay you after you retire. So I have a comfortable life, but right now I'm doing things that I won't be doing for another year. Once I get to 10,000, I'm going to change my modus operandi. I'll do most of my birding either with my brother, who subsidizes the trips, which is very fortunate, or as a guide with Rock Jumper. And when I'm with a guide with Rock Jumper, I don't get very many lifers, but they pay me, and then I can use that to pay for other trips. To do that. It's a good question, and it's not sustainable right now.
So one last question.
Yeah. Do you think I would pass you on the world? Absolutely. No question. No question at all. There are a lot of really, really good young birders out there. And there are any number of them that are going to pass me. The guy that I think will pass me, maybe not first, but most definitively, is named Ross Gagliardi. And he lives in southeastern Pennsylvania. He is a birding machine, and he's really, really good. He is really thorough, and he dedicates his whole life to finding birds. He's got a wife and child, and still they do it all the time, everywhere. Okay, yes, quick.
A geeky question. Have you, any birds you've seen that are no longer with us?
Yeah, there's several in different kind of categories. The most clear is a bird called the Atitlan grebe. It used to be found in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. It's been extinct since the early 1980s. I saw it in the early 1970s with my brother. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So are you saving all your passports?
It's funny you mentioned that. I do have all my passports. I just yesterday afternoon, it's too late. At 6:30 yesterday evening, I did a Zoom call with the New Zealand radio, national radio. And they recorded me for a radio program. And I had a story where when I went to New Zealand in 1985, the New Zealand High Commissioner in Honiara, Solomon Islands, wrote me a letter certifying that I didn't have any nuclear arms on me. Because at the time in the 1980s, we were having a dispute with New Zealand, and we would neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons on our warships. So the High Commissioner, Rodney Denham, thought it'd be funny to do the certification. And I thought it was in my passport. So I just had my passports out yesterday trying to find the certification. I couldn't find it. But it's funny, because Kimberly laughed. I literally have my bag of passports on my desk right now.
I was gonna say they're probably very impressive and,
Wow, they're well used.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty, so, all you got was a golden handshake from the Department of State, but from the Bird Club, we'll give you one of these coins here as a. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and he's done a great job of telling us who our speaker is next month, so. Lori Zoller, and it's Birds of India, I think, right? So,
The park in India. I
yeah,
think it was.
hope to see you next month.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.